Good morning, everybody, and thank you for being here. My name is Dlawer Alaaldin. I'm from the Middle East Research Institute based in Kurdistan region of Iraq, and we have been partners with ISPI for some years. It's been a great honor, and I want to thank, on behalf of everyone, ISPI, and in particular Paolo Magri, Federico, Chiara, and all the rest of the family of ISPI for bringing us together in such a wonderful place and a wonderful conference. You all know last week, it was almost today, that the Prime Minister of Iraq resigned, and immediately after him, the whole cabinet resigned. It looked like a group suicide. It was a consequence of 2 months of pressure, 2 months of demonstrations in Baghdad and a big part of the southern Iraq by angry crowds. People are angry at the political elite for their failure to provide services, jobs, rule of law, essentially failing in the whole process of state building and nation building. And the demonstrations, however it may started, it actually evolved into something very complex. And at the same time, the government and the entire elite, the Iraqi political leaders, they responded in different ways. They responded slowly, and they still have not satisfied the demand of the crowd. So the picture became even more complicated when the internal actors were combined with external actors, and there are, just like onion, as you peel it, there are more and more layers. So such a complex picture can only be addressed and simplified by such a fine and distinguished group of speakers to help us understand what is going on, what will happen in the near future, where is Iraq heading, what kind of evolution are we facing, and importantly, what can the international community do to help Iraq to stabilize and make it prosper. So with me, I have Maria Fantappie, who is a senior advisor, or senior fellow, or senior advisor to the International Crisis Group based in Belgium. We have Farhad Alaaldin, who is head of the Iraq Advisory Council and a former advisor to Iraq President. We have Andrey Kortunov, he's Director-General of the Russian International Affairs Council based in Moscow. And we have Kohler, who's Deputy Director-General for European Civil Protection in Humanitarian Aid Operation. The short version of it is ECHO of the European Commission. We'll have a fantastic hour and a half to debate these things, and I've already asked my colleagues that we will have it in the form of debate, question and answers. And I want to turn to Maria first, because you have been in and out of Iraq, studying it in a very academic way. We have also Farhad, who's actually from inside, whose knowledge and understanding of the dynamics is actually second to none. So the two of you, I want you to team up as if you're looking at it from inside out. But Maria, I want to start with you by asking you whether all these were predictable, because you've been following Iraq up for the last decade or so. And if so, what are the failures? What are the structural and functional defects? What are the root causes of this entire thing? In a very brief few statements, please.
Thank you, Dlawer. I think it was for sure predictable, starting from a very basic demographic fact. If we look at the population pyramid in Iraq, we see that 60% of the population is aged between 15 and 24, and you have actually an increase of population for each year of 1 million. So there is estimation that by 2025, the Iraqi population is going to grow from 41 million to 47, so plus 6-7 million. Italy did that much in 50 years. So you're going to have not only a young population, but also each year more young people. So there is definitely what we call a demographic youth bulge. But beyond the basic demographic fact, I think there is also an economic factor that is undeniable. The fact that Iraq is a rentier economy, which is dependent on public sector jobs, and most of this access to employment is actually managed by this leadership that is on power since 16 years. So the problem is not necessarily job creation, but is the fact that you as a young person, you can access those jobs only through the connection and dependency on this leadership. And I would say there is a third factor, which is what I call a routinized frustration. The fact that there is a daily humiliation that these young people are subjected to, from the fact of satisfying the basic needs, such as getting a driving license, to also getting like a career into the public sector. You always have to refer to those ones who are in power in order to progress. And that, I think, has really nurtured this frustration. So it's not one factor, it's not only the economy, it's not only about the economy. I think it's all these three factors together, and the key word here is frustration.
Okay. Do you want to say something about the way you've seen the authorities handle it as well? Because at the moment, we're talking about hundreds killed, thousands injured, and God knows how many disappeared. And this was from the outset, but as we speak, yesterday, another dozen or so were killed. So it's not like ending anytime soon. So what's your comment on why is it that the government is handling it in this way? Or the authorities rather than the government?
Exactly, I will not say that is the government.
Yeah.
I mean, here we have to, I think, operate a very fine difference between the politicians and the security forces. Not necessarily all the security forces, and I'm talking about both regular security forces and paramilitaries, are responding to the politicians. So that is one of the problems. But to respond to your question, how this has been handled, I think that the worrying thing is the different degrees of violence through which this is being dealt with. So from a very high degree of violence, so like using live ammunition on civilians, using tear gas on civilians and causing over 400 deaths and more than 12,000 injured, up to a more, I think, subtle violence, which comes through threatening activists, kidnapping people, and freeing them.
But let me ask you, who's handling it? Who's handling this?
I don't think that there is one responsible.
Okay. So if it's not government, who's it?
Is the I mean, if it's not the government, who is it?
Who's handling this?
I think it's different part of the security sector.
Okay.
From the officers of the Ministry of Interior, some officers of the Ministry of Interior with direct link to the ruling political parties, up to paramilitaries.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think, Farhad, feel free to comment on some of these. But I would put this to you, and this is something that I said a couple of days ago in a think tank meeting, that these demonstrations are actually one of the best things that happened to Iraq since 2003. It is most likely to bring about a lot of change and achieve a lot for Iraq that no other factor that has been able to achieve. Would you agree with that? And if so, what have been the achievements really so far?
Thank you very much, Dlawer, and thank you for ISPI for inviting us here. Thank you all for being here. The numbers been talked about until 30th of November, 426 killed, 19,136 are injured. These are figures from the Human Rights Commission in Baghdad. Obviously, the numbers has risen since then by quite a margin. In terms of these demonstrations have fundamental effect on the Iraqi policy, Iraqi politics, and Iraqi society, I would say. It has contributed a lot to an awakening of the Iraqi nationalism, the sense of belonging, especially for the youth, that they have been feeling this is not their country, this is not what they have no relation to it. Especially with the current leadership that in place, these people very much are, I would say, not quite relating in their daily governance to the youth, where these are the post-2003 generation. They very much do not link to what the leadership talks about in terms of the Ba'ath regime, the years of tyranny that they have lived in. A lot of these demonstrators actually 2000 and onward born, and they haven't seen what Saddam was looked like and so on. So this is a new phenomena, I would say, and they have seen some results from it, where we saw in the elections of 2018 the apathy for taking part in the political process was big. I mean, some figures say 20% was the participation in election, and the same people that are demonstrating did not go out and vote, and now they are active players in the process. And they moved on from early days when the demonstration started. It was about jobs and services and social justice. Now they moved on to political demands, a change of the leadership, change of government, change of even the constitution, and so on. And they have achieved some of these demands. The resignation of the government is a big achievement when it comes to the list of demands they had. The awakening for asking regional and international powers not to intervene anymore, it's another thing that we have not heard before from the Iraqi society in this vivid public way. Mm-hmm. People might have talked about it privately, but not publicly in this way.
But can I just interject here? I mean, given the political elite that the demonstrators say that they've been completely disappointed with, they are rejecting them all, and they think the entire system of governance needs to change. And often they talk about presidential system or change of constitution to something completely unrecognizable. So all of these, they're asking the same political elite to change itself to provide or to meet the demand of the demonstrators. And the demonstrators, although it's difficult to say who are they and who to talk to, but at least if you look at the entire dynamics of how Iraq has been run for the past 15 years, can you actually change, can these people change themselves when they are the beneficiaries of this downhill slope, I mean, of this lack of state building, and they are the beneficiaries? Can they actually change themselves?
It's understandable where the same elite that they have brought about this system, they don't want to change as much as they can. But the changes are forced upon them right now, and it's not by choice, in my opinion. I mean, we just saw that they have passed in Parliament the IHEC law, the Election Commission law. At the time that it used to be divided, the commission was divided by the powerful political parties. Now they have passed a new law where the commission must be comprised of judges, independent judges, and some people ask that they should be retired judges, and these people would run the election and make sure that it is not the same way that the political parties can have the same influence. So the change is forced upon the political elite rather than it's by choice they make it. And that is as a result of these demonstrations.
Okay. Did you want to say anything about this? Can they change? Can this elite and the actors, the local actors, again, we expect them to lead the process of change. Can they change themselves?
I mean, I very much agree with what Farhad said, that it's not in their interest to change, but they reach a point where I think by the way, to add up on what Farhad said, part of the establishment understands that if they don't change, they will lose out. And I think we have to look for those reformist figures that they're more aware to understand how to move forward.
Okay. Well, Farhad, I will ask you a little later after this round, but I want you to think about a couple of key questions. One is that the clock is clicking now, or ticking, for the president to select the new prime minister within the next week or so, because it's 15 days, and then the candidate has to select a government and so on. So I'd like you to explain that process, but importantly, the demonstrators are asking for change of the election law. And I'd like you to tell us how this would meet their demand, because what's wrong with the current and what would be the shape. Maybe you can also help and comment on that. But I'm going to go to our two international colleagues while you think about that. I really want to see how worried are you, Andrey, about what you see in Iraq. And again, Michael, you two have a bird's eye view of the global experience. You've seen many other countries. You've seen fragile, failing states and where the leaders are not really leading and so on. So tell me, how worried are you and what would you be advising the local leaders if it was up to you? Andrey, you start first.
Thank you for inviting me to this event. I don't consider myself to be a great expert on Iraq, but of course we try to follow events in your country. And I have to confess that I personally did not foresee what has happened. In Iraq, I realized that it would be a bumpy road, and I could imagine some crisis, but of course the scale of the turmoil, I think for many of us was something unexpected. And I'm worried. And I think that there are two reasons, at least two reasons to be worried. We can talk about immediate repercussions of a state failure in Iraq, if indeed there is a state failure there. It is too premature to say that it is already fait accompli. And we can talk about long-term challenges and consequences of this failure. In terms of the immediate repercussions, I think we can come with a number of scenarios. All of them are bad. It will definitely have an implication for Syria, because Syria and Iraq are very interconnected, and definitely it would be yet another complication in a very complex Syrian puzzle. We can imagine renaissance of ISIS. We can imagine other negative scenarios for Syria. Second, I think that if there is a real implosion in Iraq, it means that the country will once again become a playground for the United States and Iran. And that would have negative implications for the bilateral relations between Tehran and Washington, but also for all actors which happen to be affected by the current US-Iranian confrontation. And I also think that it will have immediate implications on the situation in the Gulf. Again, implications will be negative. I don't think how without an Iraqi participation, without an Iraqi involvement, one can consider any collective security or even more moderate confidence-building system emerging in the Gulf. However, I would also like to underscore longer-term consequences. And when I read forecasts about the Middle East, and when authors try to speculate about positive models in the region, usually they do not refer to Egypt, they do not refer to Syria, they do not refer to Saudi Arabia. They refer primarily to Iraq. With all the shortcomings of the current regime, the assumption is that Iraq was relatively successful in building nascent institutions, in trying to be...
I tell you what, Andrey, I saw the same thing happening to you yesterday, so take your time. I'm going to move on to Michael. I'll get back to you. Michael, take over, please. Same question.
Right, and I think we work here like twin brothers, actually, and have a very similar vision.
Yeah, speak on behalf of Russia as well, if you like.
I will change my accent a little bit.
Okay.
No, you asked whether how worried we are, and of course there's reason for worry.
Well,
but
I want
time,
you to remember that whatever happens in your neighborhood in Iraq will influence you on the migration, terrorism, lack of trade, all of these. So speak on behalf of Europe as a whole as well.
It's a very interesting thought. Nobody had that in Brussels before. But anyway. No, honestly, we are very worried, but at the same time, we are very encouraged. And actually, we don't only see Iraq. We see Lebanon. We see Algeria. We see a number of countries. We see even less speculative events. If you see, for example, that in the last general elections in Tunisia, only 8% of the population participated, 8% of the youth participated. It's also, in a way, a declaration of lack of confidence in the political system, in the political elite at large. So we are now, in my view, in the second wave of the Arab Spring. If you miss that, don't worry, there will be a third and a fourth wave, for sure. Because we are into a big change in societies. Now, what is missing in Iraq in particular, but the same thing could be said about other countries, is inclusiveness. And I think two forms of inclusiveness. One is economic inclusiveness, and I think Maria gave us all the good arguments. People feel disenfranchised. There's a young population. Iraq will move from 38, 40, 39 million inhabitants now to 50 million or more in the next 20 years. These people feel disenfranchised, not only in terms of economic opportunities, but also in terms of co-deciding about their own future. So very understandable reactions. But then also a political disenfranchising, of course, political lack of opportunities, political lack of inclusiveness. Now, on the one hand, it is very good that you have these demonstrations, that they have results, like the demise of the government, for example. On the other hand, this is worrying. Why is this worrying? Because on the one hand, let's not forget, back 1.5 years ago, we were all relatively optimistic about Iraq. There were the elections, there was the new government, it was a relatively, let's say, fair and inclusive election process. On the European side, you know, we started a new deal with Iraq. We had the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement coming into force. We have Council conclusions of 2018, 2019, which formulated the European vision of support. We had the Kuwait conference where Europe played a big role. So we're all optimistic. Now, does this come to a standstill right now? Question mark. Secondly, will there be new interlocutors anytime soon, even if a new prime minister is appointed, a new government is formed? What will be the cloud? What will be the possibility of these people to break with the kind of circle of vested interest that we have right now? And let's not forget, it's not only a question about economic and political inclusiveness. Iraq is still in a post-conflict, perhaps even in a conflict scenario. I'm dealing with humanitarian aid. I don't forget that about 18 to 20% of the Iraqi population is today in need of humanitarian supplies. We're speaking about 6.7, 6.8 million people. We still have 1.7 million internally displaced people. We have 400,000 people who live in camps, many of them being Sunni. And if you don't have a policy of inclusiveness, if you don't have a policy of not only supplying these people, but bringing them back into the society, making them dignified members of society, you put already, so to say, the match at the paperwork of future radicalization, future lack of inclusiveness. So yes, we are worried, but we want to take this as a chance.
Okay, well, I like what I heard. You clearly echo, and EU have got heavy involvement in the area, and you were hoping or planning for reconstruction, reconciliation, all sorts of bringing back Iraq to its normality. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that, but also EU policy as well. I will give you some time to think about it. If Andrey is ready, with a glass of water handy, if you want to carry on from where you
No, I just wanted to echo what has just been said. I think that if Iraq fails, the light in the end of the tunnel for all the region becomes dimmer. Because we can say that Iraq is not inclusive enough, but it is more inclusive than many other countries. You can say that the devolution of power has not progressed probably too much, but it progressed more than in other countries. So I think that with Iraq failing, the whole idea of a model, successful model for the region, is back to the table, and we'll have to reconsider some of our assumptions. Right. Because if Iraq fails, it's a wealthy country, it has oil, it's a country which has institutions, which had arguably the best starting conditions to show the region an example, how you can handle state building in the 21st century. So if it fails, well, frankly, I don't know, because I don't take Tunisia, for example, as a role model for the region. It's too special. But Iraq is much more central to the region.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I will come back to you, but I want you to think about next question. That's Russia. Russia's not only policy in Iraq, because we heard a lot about Russian policy in Syria, and it's entirely different domain, different policies probably. But what can Russia do as well to help in this entire state-building process. But in the game of Iran, America, you mentioned, how can you actually nudge Iran to do a better job in Iraq and so on? So I'll leave you to think about that, but I'm going to go to a very good insider, His Excellency, Ambassador Bruno Pasquino, who came fresh from Iraq, from Baghdad, to join us here. Tell us, how worried are you, and what is your reading into the situation, please? It works. You can speak now.
Okay, diplomats are not technicians, so this is the proof.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Dlawer, and to all of you. In reality, there could be a zillion questions on this, but I would like to not change perspective, no, because you are absolutely right in what you're saying. But can I say, just for the sake of discussion, can we not be a bit optimistic once we overcome this awfully bloody, violent phase? You were mentioning, actually it's just been mentioned once, and I was a bit surprised that you mentioned the word Sunni. This is the first time we're not talking of a sectarian conflict. It's not, the people we meet, the youngsters who are protesting, they're not saying, I'm Shia, I am an Iraqi. Farhad, you were rightly mentioning this is the first time openly the nationalistic aspect is coming out. So the general question, apart from the very specific ones, what can we get out from this if the so-called deep state will refrain to use too much violence in order to quench this? And you were mentioning rightly, yesterday was another very violent night in Baghdad and in the south, very violent. So there are very good reasons to be worried, but let's try to be optimistic at the end of the debate.
You had a question, didn't you? What was that again?
Is it
because you looked at Maria, and I wanted to go to her.
Actually, to all, Maria on the others.
Yeah.
Is there any reason to be optimistic? According to your personal experience, you didn't mention her fantastic experience in the EU mission.
Right.
You could also mention that.
Do you have an answer for it yourself?
Me?
Yeah.
No, I'm not. I'm a diplomat. I never give answers. It's a problem, and then I say, yeah, but.
Okay. A very good diplomat, but anyway, I needed the Italian view, not just European, and here's the Italian view, but yeah, go ahead.
No, I want to be also the devil advocate, since he was my teacher for being the devil advocate while I was in Baghdad as the EU. I mean, when we say that we look at Iraq as a successful model, no, and I mean, and we fear now the collapse of everything. I mean, I think that we have to revisit this assumption of whether, I mean, that state was really existing so strongly. I mean, or was just a clique of people that was there, and large part of the large majority of the population was just disenfranchised totally, and that machine actually was holding on a very fragile equilibrium between the US trying to do something, the Iranians trying to do something else, the leadership having the money for some time to redistribute. Still the generational aspect what didn't emerge, and now that this is booming in that moment, now we say, okay, this is, I am surprised, but actually this probably wasn't such a stable situation as we thought, and this is why I think that we have to reconsider also as international community, who are our partners in Iraq? Is the leadership a meaningful partner for the EU, for Italy, for European states? Or maybe we should look somewhere else outside formal politics. And a short answer to Ambassador Pasquino's question, I think that the success of this movement, among many limitations that it is, as it was mentioned, that it has reshaped the relation between Iraqis a transformative movement within the society where people actually, for the first time, they actually kicked that idea that was in the 90s under the embargo, where people were against each other. They actually worked together. If we look at the Turkish restaurant experience, people have built actually a sort of microstate there that the leadership wasn't able to build. So, okay, with its own limitation, but this is a movement of self-governance that the leadership wasn't able to produce.
Ghalib, it's not Turkish restaurant. It's actually a building called Turkish restaurant. It's the Tahrir Square. I will very quickly ask you a few more questions before I get to the audience. But Maria, I want you also to think about policy recommendations, because we academics are always accused of being good at explaining things, but then we stop there. We need to be more practical and have practical recommendations. But Farhad, do you remember I asked you a question about what the president's challenges are and how the government should be formed, but importantly, very quickly lead to this question of what's wrong with the election law? Why should we change that, please?
Well, the process is 17th of December is the deadline for choosing a new prime minister. And being typical Iraqis, I think that's the date that the nomination should happen. Although there are some credible candidates now, their names have been put forward, and maybe, but that's a very low chance maybe, that we might see a candidate coming forward. As far as the election law is concerned, there is the current election law that's been passed and that was in the previous election 2018 used. It basically, it's a deformed sandlag system where the Iraqis adopted it to their own use by using a huge dividing factor where only it favors the big lists, and any newcomer, any new party would struggle to gain seats in the parliament. So, and obviously the current political parties have huge resources, financial and otherwise, that they can dominate the system. The new proposed law, which is being favored by the Marja'iyya also, is very much, they want to distribute the provinces into smaller circles, smaller constituencies, and then we have first past the post system. This is what's being proposed. Okay. However, now we are talking about, the debate will be next week in Parliament, where there are suggestions of 50-50, 50% goes for lists and 50% goes to individuals in terms of first past the post. Plus, the old election law had a lot of loopholes where it was used by the political parties, the influential ones, to get more votes. That is the voting of the expats, what they call the special voting for the military and the armed forces, the hospitals, and so on. This was also a place where playing with these votes have been taking place. So this should be dealt with also. Okay. And there are a lot of other technical issues. Let's
leave that later. There are a lot of hands, but we've not yet finished with a few final things. But I want to bring USIP into this. Mr. Sarhang Hamsaid is from USIP. You guys have invested a lot in Iraq's reconciliation, democratization, so on. But there's one specific comment I wanted to make about democratization and the election law. But importantly, just before all these started, the Iraqis abolished the provincial councils. They wanted a new law, and then in April there should have been a provincial council election, which is no longer going to be. And the parliament abolished them, maybe some people think illegally, and now it's been ratified by the president. So can you comment on that, please?
Good morning. Thank you for looping me in. So from a peace building stability angle, democracy for Iraq, there are those who believed in it, that this is the value, this is the new form of government, but my approach to this, our approach to this, is that this is a path to peace and stability. If it's not inclusive, you don't have all the people involved, Iraq will not see peace. I think there is a moment of hope where Iraq's citizenry is in its most active form. 2003, we didn't have that, now we have that. But the risk is, and the institutions of the government are being tested. right now as we speak, and there is a political wrangling about that. But there is a tendency in Iraq that is dangerous, and it is really important for the Iraqis to pay attention to, and for the international community to also pay attention to, because we have collectively invested a lot in Iraq. Dismantling or dissolving for now the Provisional Council, you can see it as just a response to anger, or you can look deeper and say, what is happening in Iraq? Okay. I think the spirit of democracy in Iraq has been sliding back, in the sense that the mechanics of institutions have been working, but not the spirit of the institutions, not the spirit of democracy. Okay. There was those who were wanting centralization in Iraq because they have seen it, they yearn back because they didn't see democracy quite work for them. So there's a second group that just sees democracy difficult, and they say maybe centralization and strong man and centralized institutions could be the solution. And there's the third group, which is the people who are angry, and the first line of defense, they see the establishment as the Provisional Council, and they put their anger towards that. Now, the risk is that those who want to go back to centralization, there are internal and external actors who are believing in it. I don't see really a constitutional change, but if it should happen, there is a tendency to dissolve and remove the provincial councils even from the constitution, and that's a dangerous place to go. Okay. And I think that is what people need to distinguish between the institution and the corrupt people that they want to remove from those institutions.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to go to Andrey and tell us about Russian policy in Iraq, but importantly, what can Russia do to help Iraqis? It's yours now.
Well, if I were to respond to the question where the Russian policy is more successful, in Syria or in Iraq, I would argue that it is more successful in Iraq for a couple of reasons. First of all, in Iraq, Russia doesn't try to punch above its weight. It's a minority shareholder. It cannot compete with Iran or with the United States in terms of influence. However, it has its fair share of engagement in Iraq. Second, unlike Syria, in Syria, Russia, quote unquote, owns the country and is responsible for what's going on in Syria on a day-to-day basis. Second, if you look at Iraq, you'll see that the number of foreign policy tools that Russia uses in Iraq is much broader than it is in Syria. It's not just about the military, it's not only about diplomacy, but it is also about major economic players. Russian oil companies have a stake, and definitely they are included in the decision-making process in Moscow, which makes this process, in my opinion, more efficient and more productive. Also, the difference between Syria and Iraq is that in Iraq, Russia tries to maintain a diversified political investment portfolio. Definitely, it's very important to keep relations with Baghdad, but Russia has its own track with the Iraqi Kurdistan, and even with southern Sunnite groups. So I think that if you look at the Russian policy, I would argue that in Iraq it is more sustainable than it is in Syria. It is more modest, but that reflects the real capacity that Russia has in the region. So I tend to be a little bit more optimistic about Iraq than about Syria in the long term. And I think that Russia can play a role in other issues related to Iraq. Of course, the big issue is Iran, and I feel a little bit awkward to speak in front.
Don't worry, I've given him the microphone. He will respond. Go on.
Yeah, but let me give you my opinion, and I will allow myself to be very undiplomatic. Okay. I think that Iraq is the jewel in the crown of the Persian Empire. And for many reasons, historical, economic reasons, psychological reasons, I think it is and it will continue to be a top priority for the Iranian leadership, no matter what this leadership might be. So what we can try to incentivize Iran to do is to make its influence in Iraq a little bit softer. How can we do it? I don't think that you can do it in the framework of the bilateral Iranian-Iraqi relations, because there is an asymmetry in this relationship. And it will continue to be asymmetry for a long time. So if I were to use very undiplomatic language, I would say that if you want to somehow see a soft Iranian approach to Iraq, you need to compensate Iran on the regional level and to prove to Iranians the advantages of multilateralism. I think it can be done. I think that Russia can play a role in that, but Russia cannot do it alone. It needs support primarily from Europe, hopefully from the United States, and definitely from other countries in the region.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We've got you said I don't want to be diplomatic. You're a think tank head, and we've got a diplomat who's also a think tank head. But I want you to be less diplomatic, more think tank. Please, Aghay Sajjadpur. Actually, you're the deputy foreign minister, but as well as head of ISPI, or your think tank, the main think tanks in Tehran. Please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dlawer. Thank you for the panel. I think it's a very interesting and deep panel. I have, as a student of the field, 3 quick, maybe difficult questions. First is, would Iraq be more normal after this demonstration, or we'll see more abnormalities? If the base is a second Arab Spring wave, in the first we saw a lot of disruption in the Arab world, would it mean more abnormality in the vicinity or not? I think this is a very fundamental strategic question. The second refers to the Kurdish side. Kurds in the north have been silent, or at least not proactive in this regard. What is the perception of the Kurdish actors in Iraq on this development, and how it interplay in the evolution of what we'll have in the near future? I mean, the Kurdish factor. And the third, which is very important, is where is the intervention by the Arab states like UAE, like Saudi Arabia, and by United States? I think U.S. emotionally is very happy that there are demonstrations here and there, so they think it is their maximum pressure working, wrongly of course the assumption, but I think it would have some very significant ramification for U.S.-Iraqi relationship and U.S. The region relationship, and I want to see how the panel looks. Okay. I hope I acted as a think tanker. Thank you.
Right. Well, you came up with questions, and I expected some response to the mention of Iran a few times, but never mind. We'll have these questions addressed to you guys a little later. But I would like to go to Michael, because I asked you about policies, whether it's EU or EU member states, because I know there is a big difference between the two. Please.
Interesting point. I have to refocus now, because especially after Andrey spoke, I would really like to turn this into an Iran discussion, especially as you brought in, I think, anything from the Sassanids in the 7th century.
Not too much.
No, I will refrain from that. Okay. Sometimes, rarely, but sometimes I can be disciplined. No, I think two things are perhaps honest to admit. First, if you go to Brussels, if you spoke to policy leaders there, you would probably not conclude that Iraq is number one on the EU's agenda. Why is that so? I think there are historical reasons. One is, for example, that different from Syria, different from Libya, different from Palestine, Iraq is not a Mediterranean country. And our focus in that part of the world is on Mediterraneans because they are neighbors, because they are directly linked to the European Union. Secondly, and I think implicitly you alluded to that, I think it would be unfair to say that all the EU member states have the same level of interest with respect to Iraq. I mean, of course, there is, for historical reasons, a very clear British approach. Then you have, I think, a very strong German interest. And interestingly, you have a strong Swedish interest. Now, where does that come from? It comes chiefly from migration. Because, of course, you have a big number of Iraqis, Kurds, but not only Kurds, that find themselves in Sweden, also in Finland. So that is interesting, because what could trigger more interest in Iraq on the European side? It could either be a major geopolitical destabilization of the entire region, then the EU as a whole would be very worried, and we come to Andrey's points, or it would be new waves of migrants. And interestingly, if you look at the figures of arrivals, of irregular arrivals in Turkey right now, and see Turkey as a conduit to Europe, then you see, of course, that in addition to Afghans and Bangladeshis, now the Iraqis are really number one. So that could, I think, trigger new European interest in Iraq. But it's a pity, because we would like to see more, if you want, constructive, partnership-based interest. Now, when I look at that, I think it would be fair to say that Europe being the ultimate soft power on earth, we basically use all the tools that we have, and we don't use the tools that we do not have. We use development assistance at a large scale. We use humanitarian assistance at a considerable scale. We use, of course, trade means and so forth under the new agreement that we have. And we even go as far as we can go in terms of soft security. For example, there is, of course, the advisory mission concerning civilian aspects of security sector reform, something which has operated for a couple of years. If I read out, and I have some papers here in front of me, what we are doing, it ticks all the boxes. For example, the objectives of EU development aid. Right now, we have about 500 million euros worth of grant, not loan, grant money in programs operated inside Iraq. We do support to human rights and rule of law. We do basic service delivery, that is education, livelihoods, and so forth. We do energy, sustainable energy for all. We do stabilization and demining. We do job creation in agro-businesses and public service delivery.
Okay,
we work on migration and so forth. So
we've got the message. No, that's excellent. Do you have any more points?
Well, the point is, why does all this not yet lead to real change? And there we come to the question of, who do we partner with?
That's right.
And there you have two possibilities.
Yeah.
Either you partner with, say, local authorities, regional authorities, and then you can have very successful individual projects, but these individual projects do not lead to systemic change. Or you have a competent government, be it local or national, that you can operate systemic change with. For example, we have programs in the area of public finance management.
Okay.
Now you can train and you can invest in people, but if there is no conducive environment that helps those trained people then to apply what they have learned, then you still have a messy public finance situation. And there, we are in a vicious circle. We need to have a willingness to govern better in order to really deploy our instruments.
That's fine. I think I'm going to come to you, because immediately that's a natural progression where you might want actually to make recommendations to EU. But I don't want wishful thinking. I don't want aspirations or hopes. But
I also have a list of...
No, I don't want lists.
No, but I mean, because I was also a EU official just up to a year ago, I can say that the EU-Iraq strategy speaks about and refers to partnership with the Iraqi government and the Iraqi population. Why do we not focus on the second part? I know it's more difficult, but it matters. And I'm going to go more specific on this, but very briefly, I think that here the fact that Iraq is not a priority in Brussels, which I agree 100%, and I always sensed it when I went to Brussels in my discussion. I think it's a big mistake in some sense, because here, especially with the situation, the way it's evolving, where the US, as we were saying, it's increasingly using this protest for its own maximum pressure policy, and on the other side, you have the Iranians who are trying to contain in their own way, through violent means also, the situation. Then you have the EU, which remains a non-strategic player. So this is a real problem, I think, that we face, and this is why I think that we have to, it has been very good that there has been a very strong declaration against the violence against the protesters, but I think we need to go down to the point of saying how can we make this denunciation of violence in a more practical agenda that can stop violence on the ground. And I think that here the EU can play an important role. EU member states can provide legal assistance to activists, to civic activists which are threatened. This is not existing until now. They can take a more strong position in protection of the Iraqi High Commission of Human Rights, which has done an amazing job in counting the numbers of deaths and kidnapped people. They can provide technical assistance to like document and collect information for the Ministry of Health of who is injured, how many are injured. This all they can pressure the government to actually not just being passive in front of the increasing restriction of freedom of press. And on the issue of partnership, again, we have to understand how we can partner not only with the authorities, which, as it has been said, it didn't seem to have led to any meaningful result, but also with those sections of the Iraqi population who are now organizing. So we need to understand in a more original way how this reconstruction, reconciliation, development project that the EU is funding, they can actually integrate those people who are now protesting.
Okay. I'll come to you, Farhad, for two things. One is that Aghay Sajjadpur asked a question maybe best addressed by you, why the Kurdish leaders have been silent a little. But actually, in that context, I'd like you also to comment on the Erbil-Baghdad relations. Interestingly, the day that Adel al-Mahdi submitted his resignation or declared that he will resign, not yet resigned, the very next day a Kurdish delegation went to Baghdad and signed a new agreement with him. So it's a very delicate situation. So tell us about that side, but I will later ask you to comment on how the international community can help as well. But let's deal with the Kurdish side first.
Let me deal with the international just
Please
because
do.
to continue.
Okay.
The international response has been mute, to say the least, in terms of, especially with the latest development and the protest. And that really goes across the board. I understand that most of the European Union members, individually, usually they do make statements every now and then. But even on this one, apart from the British ambassador, John Wilkes, who issued a late statement also, but nonetheless he did. The others were completely silent, and that's because they have their own interest to protect, plus they don't have the go-ahead from their capitals to say much. And we didn't see any individual member states on the level of a state to say something. And obviously when we go to the EU mission and Brussels also, they were very much mute until very late date, including United States. United States, Mike Pompeo made the statement nearly end of October. And that was, by then, we had in excess of 250 killed and some 12 to 13,000 injured by end of October. So in general, the international community has been really not up to the challenge, if you want, and they simply did not know how to deal with this new situation.
Why don't you say a little bit more about America? Because they really matter, and there was a specific question.
No, the Americans are important in Iraq. When it comes to level of importance of the international community, America has the #1 spot, and is very much in par with the Iranian level of playing in Iraq. The Iranians were immediately on the case. They declared their hand very quickly. They were completely anti this protest. The Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei even made a statement where he said that the government should deal with this because they saw this as part of a conspiracy against the state and more importantly against their interest in Iraq. And they see it, even until now, they see it in this way. So the Iranians were immediately on the ball, but the Americans really didn't know what to say. In one hand, they were shy to declare anything because they say, oh, maybe they will say this is an American propaganda, American influenced game. And at the same time, they see the human rights abuses practiced against the demonstrators. So they were shy in terms of saying much until very, very late. The EU definitely were not at the right, on the right level. Especially if you talk to the European members, to the parliamentarians, to the missions, they come on top of their priorities, the human rights, and the talk about state building, nation building, and so on. And the $400 million or euros that's been allocated to Iraq programs, a lot of it goes to the United Nations rather than anybody else. The UNAMI does this, and we all know UNAMI has their own system of bureaucracy and how they do spend money. So majority, I would say, majority of it goes to administration rather than anything else. So the result of your 400 million is very little. because the way that these programs are implemented and spend the money is not good enough.
Okay,
I'll
don't go to
come
the
back to
Kurdish
you
side
with
yet,
the-
no, because you actually did a good job in keeping the flow, but now Maria wants to comment maybe on your comment, and then I'll come
Very
back.
briefly, that to me, in relation to this issue of the U.S. administration, for me, it's very worrying when the U.S. administration actually, speaks about the right cause, human rights abuse and restriction of freedom of press, but it does it in a framework of its own strategic goal of maximum pressure policy, because this for me is concerning not necessarily because it hurts pro-Iranian people, but because it actually hurts the cause of human rights violations, and it paralyzes like the debate on this. So I think that one of the things that can be done really is also to support those mid players like the presidency or the UN special representative who have been really trying to play a role of intermediaries between the political class and the protest. The EU can do that. If the US administration does it in this anti-Iranian mood, it will actually paralyze this figure.
Okay, now Kurdish issues.
One last point on this.
I think
will come to the
we've
Kurdish.
overdone
No,
it.
I want to talk about Russia. Russia has a transactional relationship in Iraq. They all care about their own interest in Iraq, and they don't do anything else. So as Andrey said rightly, it's a completely different game for Russia in Iraq than in Syria. They care about, or their interest is mainly in the oil programs they are in the north and in the south, and they don't interfere in politics, they don't interfere with anything, and they never make statements. So we will not hear from the Russians say anything about Iraq.
Well, in that case, Andrey was brave to make a statement.
Absolutely.
There we are.
Okay.
In
terms of the
Baghdad-Erbil
relationship, obviously the Kurds were very happy to see the government of Adel Abdel Mahdi. They enjoyed excellent relationship with him, and he rightly said many times that he will not let the Kurdish civil servants to starve, so to speak, or that they should not be punished for whatever the political problems that might be between Baghdad and Erbil. And during his short 1 year, the relationship was pretty good. But it remains a major obstacle in terms of future relations. The parliament passed the 2019 budget, and there was a clause that was passed where it was like a loophole, so to speak, where Baghdad could manage to pay the monthly budget, half of it, let's say. Now the parliamentarians are very much determined to close this loophole, and it will not happen. So we are expecting to hit some rocky shores in the next future, unless the new prime minister who comes in must need the Kurdish blessing and Kurdish votes.
Okay.
Then obviously that would be a different dynamics where the negotiations for the new government, how it's going to turn out, and then we might see something there.
Thank you. There were 3 hands that I saw earlier. If they still have the same question, please, the gentleman over there, and if you can give the microphone, yeah, and we'll come to you.
Thank you very much. I'm Maurizio Melani. I'm a former ambassador to Iraq, and now I'm teaching international relations. And now I have 2 points. One is related to the developments which can take place in Iraq. There will be a new prime minister, probably, which will be appointed by the president, who will receive the confidence by the parliament. And there will be a new, probably, electoral law. And then there will be elections. Now, in these elections, what this situation which is coming up, I mean, these protests, these young people are in the street and so on, what can be their political expression? I mean, are they going to form one or new parties? Will they act within the existing parties? So this, I think, is something which is not very clear what can be the outcome. Okay. Then we have also to consider that it depends on what will be the electoral law. Because if it is the first past the post, probably there will be a plethora of independent candidates who will have an important role in their constituencies, But then this can create a difficult situation in forming, let's say, a ruling coalition. Okay, and another point is concerning the international framework. Now, in this room, but also in many other rooms of these dialogues, we can see that there is a great demand of Europe. In the sense that in Iraq, apparently, I mean, there is a discontent about this condominium, I mean, by two rivals.
Can you go straight to the point, please?
The United States and Iran, and there is a request of Europe. Now, you say that we have many means. One means that we have also is the possibility to utilize our CSDP instruments, for instance, in supporting also the police, the security system, and so on.
Okay.
We hope that the new setup which is taking place in Europe can play a more relevant role.
Thank you.
Not only here, but also in the region.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Please, over there. Federico, can you, yeah, please go ahead.
Is it working? Just two quick questions for Kak Farhad. The first one, isn't really interesting now some people see the rise of nationalism within Shia as a positive thing in Iraq. I mean, is it what Iraq needs is like sense of nationalism? And the second point, when we look at the waves of protest movements in Iraq from 2003 to 2019, there has never been a movement that all groups of the Iraqi society together protesting. Though the demands have been common, like legitimate demands that can be national demands, but there has been never a protest movement that all Iraqis from all sectors together protesting. What does that mean for the nature of Iraqi state?
Okay. Can you give the microphone to the gentleman over there and this microphone to the lady right in the front? Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. I am QI from Iran IPIS. My question deals with the issue of the root causes of the demonstrations in Iraq. I've heard that some internal elements have been mentioned here, like economic problems or youth element. But there was no reference to the foreign elements. To what extent do you think that the money that is injected into the country and supporting the demonstrations is also playing a role in these demonstrations? And especially when we see that the same internal elements we have in some other Arab countries. For example, in Saudi Arabia, what is the role of youth in Saudi Arabia, or many other problems? But why we do not have such demonstrations? So, what is the role of foreign elements?
Understood.
Thank you.
Please.
My question is to Maria. You've done extensive research on youth in Iraq. The movement that we're seeing cohering right now, to what extent do you think that people can move beyond maybe self-governance in the Turkish restaurant to actually participating in the political sphere, after they've been disenfranchised for such a long time? Is there a political horizon here?
Okay. I'm relying on you to remember the questions addressed to you, but let's have Ghalib Bey next. Ghalib Dali. Okay.
Thank you very much. My question would be Maria and...
I think the microphone is not working.
Oh, sorry. My question will be to Maria and to Farhad. Maria, I mean, right now the Prime Minister has been toppled. So what is the next stage in terms of political demands of these protesters? So is it like, the government change, or is it a systemic change? If it's a systemic change, what direction do you think that it's going to progress from now on? And Farhad, I think a bit building on previous questions as well too, because like whenever I hear the phrase of Iraqi nationalism, I'm a bit skeptical, because during the Saddam, it was like, a nice word for the Sunni Arab primacy, and now it seems like a nice word for the Shia primacy. If you stick with your thing, when you say like Iraqi nationalism, where does Sunni Arab and the Kurds features in this Iraqi nationalism? It seems like Iraq is a country internally falling apart, but externally we all push them, just stick together.
Thank you. Next to you, and then we come around for the answers. It was
It's
working.
Okay.
Okay, right.
Thank you very much. I want to push the attention on the role of youth. There has been said very often that there has been a lot of similarities we have been seeing in this time, of course, a lot of uprising from the youth, but I would rather think that Iraq is somehow different from the other youth uprising, looking at first of all, that Iraq has faced, or the new generation, which we are seeing right now, has faced since years a long road of war, of conflict, of ISIS, and we have to think about that this is somehow very different from other countries in this sense. And secondly, also that the repression has been very strong and somehow bloody, looking at, for example, differently of Lebanon. So the question is in Iraq, is there any intention on looking specifically on the needs of this new generation which is rising up, which is willing to have a change in this sense and having also, let's say, somehow simply more peace and more stability, also more rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go the reverse order and ask Michael to either respond to some questions or have your own final words.
Well, it comes to the same. Thank you very much. Many questions were addressed to the inside Iraq dimension, to which I will not respond. Ambassador, you asked what could the EU do more, and I agree that not only in Iraq but also in many other theaters, so to say, there is in a way a cry for more EU. So it's not a problem, so to say, of the situation, it's a problem of the EU getting its act together. And there I would hold it's not only a question of let's say, mobilizing this or that resource that we have. You spoke about CSDP missions, and actually we have CSDP missions there. So it's not only about, a little bit here, a little bit there. It's about giving it the right focus. And there the key question is, why does Iraq, in our terminology, not form part of the European neighborhood policy? In other words, why is Jordan in, but Iraq is out, for example? If we believe that Iraq has a real role for the entire region, that you cannot come to inclusive development for the entire region, then you need to give it a more overall focus. And therefore, I think it should be kind of regrouped, and therefore the resources that we have for the neighborhood should also be at the disposal of our action in Iraq. But then the other point is that if you want to engage, you need to take responsibility. And I'm not sure at this moment in time, the majority of Brussels leaders, and we just got a new generation of Brussels leaders a week ago, already has detected that they should invest their political capital in Iraq. So I think we would have, as you are in a responsible position, we could have some very interesting discussions in the Foreign Affairs Council if Italy, for example, took an initiative and would bring this to the fore. Maybe just one comment on what the lady said. Yes, of course, there is a difference between protests in Lebanon, Algeria, in a couple of other countries, and in Iraq. And all the arguments that you brought, in my view, are right. What still, however, I think is a parallel is the consistency of these protests. That they drag on week after week after week after week, regardless of what the number of victims is. So this is a very clear expression of two things. First, that the institutions, including civil society organizations, have no longer the trust of this young population. And that is something you see also in other countries, in Algeria, Lebanon, and so forth. Regardless of whoever calls authority is no longer being trusted, even those people that we think are the good guys.
Okay.
And secondly, regardless of what the level of repression is, it simply goes on. And that, from you, is a new factor that the international community, including the European Union, has not yet really taken into account.
Thank you. Andrew, would you like?
I think that it is evident to everybody that Iraqi problems can be resolved only by Iraqis themselves. And international engagement might be a factor, but a relatively minor factor. What we can do is to make sure that this international engagement will not be a part of the problem, but a part of the solution. And of course, to a very large extent, that depends on the nature of the relationship between the United States and Iran. I think that if this relationship remains confrontational, there will always be an additional problem for Iraq, and not only for Iraq. But I think that it also implies that other international players should take a more active position on that to mitigate the consequences of this very difficult bilateral relationship between Washington and Tehran. I think we should move in the direction of a more favorable international environment, and here I think maybe like it was in case of GPOS, maybe EU3 plus Russia plus China. Nobody mentioned China here, but I think China also has a stake in making sure that there'll be fewer problems in Iraq. Maybe there is a way to work together in order to mitigate these negative consequences of the bilateral confrontation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Farhad.
If I can recall the questions, as far as the question about the representation or political representation of the protesters, there has none at the moment. But I'm pretty sure when the time comes to the election time, which could be in 6 months or 9 months' time, they will evolve and they will come up with some sort of representation, or they will be forming their own entities. This is yet to be seen. At the moment, they are not declaring any political affiliation of any sort.
Can I here ask you to comment on the role of the Marja'iyya, because it may represent their, or embody their view and direct their view? What do you think?
That's a very good reminder, actually. It's important to talk about the Marja'iyya. Marja'iyya has played a central role in terms of this protest especially. And their role since 2003 have been guidance and really in many ways, especially in the government formation, they have interfered and they have had a say in terms of who could become prime minister and so on. While this time they are very much more direct with the protests, especially when there was so much bloodshed. They directly intervene, and every Friday sermon they have a political statement that they make in terms of, and the line that they have took is total condemnation of the violence and the killing. They are very firm on this, and they are repeating that the perpetrators has to be brought to justice. And they also very much were the main influential power for the government resignation. I think if it wasn't for the call of Marja'iyya, we would have not seen the government resign.
Would it be fair to say they, in a way, act as a Wilayat Faqih, but without having the Wilayat Faqih?
Certainly not. I mean, this is the fundamental difference between Najaf and Tehran in terms of this very fact, is they totally reject or differ with the notion of becoming Wilayat Faqih. Sayyid Sistani had always made this clear. And this time, in terms of the selection of the new prime minister, they have said that we will not, and actually yesterday, they said, we will not have a say in terms of who becomes prime minister. This is not our thing. In terms of Kamaran and the Iraq nationalism and Ghalib Bey, the Iraqi nationalism in the chauvinistic way is rejected and rejected by all. Iraq must be inclusive, federal, democratic. This is what all the Iraqis are signing up to and affiliated with, including Kurdistan. If you go to Kurdistan and the Kurdish leadership now, they are coming back to Baghdad rather than moving away. 2 years ago, they made the referendum. Now it's the reverse of that. It's actual Kurdish leadership now. They made a statement and public statement that we are coming back to Baghdad in force. So it's a reversal of that. In terms of what I meant by the Iraq nationalist awakening, if you want, that's happening, is the rejection of interference by the political and the international and regional powers. We all know Iran has huge influence in Iraq, America has huge influence in Iraq, and so on. Sometimes I say, everybody's interfering with Iraq, including Mozambique. And maybe I say Mozambique, they might do it also. So this is something that has to be rectified, and the Iraqis need to work on that. And this is really what they are doing. In terms of our colleague from ISPI that he talks about the funding, I can tell you the funding at the beginning started totally Iraqi. The volunteers, the people who donated food, logistics, equipment, water cannons, water bottles, and so on. It's families cooking food and bringing it to the Tahrir Square. It was totally self-funded. What we can see from the foreign funding is more to do with social media. The campaigns that's happening on Twitter, on Facebook, you see thousands of Saudi-created Twitter accounts where they are promoting their direction of the narrative, so to speak. These are, we can see it. And to be honest, Iraqis are not fooled by it. They know, they can immediately recognize where this is coming from and so on. But the fact of the matter remains, there is one side who see the whole thing as a conspiracy of the West, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and so on, and the other side see it in a different way. So this is going to be ongoing. In terms of Aghai Sajadpour talked about UAE and Saudi Arabia funding. In Iraq, since 2003, they have played bad role in terms of the money, because Saudi Arabia does not have a policy. They have money. And usually this money sometimes falls into the wrong hands. They do fund fundamentalists without knowing sometimes. And this is really being the bad policy for the Saudi Arabia. United Arab Emirates are more clever. They understand the things more, and usually they do not pay money like what the Saudis and sometimes the Qataris used to do. So their money has been bad influence and have created a lot of problems for the Iraqis in the past. We have seen hundreds or maybe thousands of Saudis who came to Iraq, and they were the suicide bombers that killed the Iraqis. Okay. This has been stopped. Yeah. So in a way, this is maybe is ongoing, but it's still it's changing, and it's not really important or directly affecting this protest. This protest is purely Iraqi in its fundamental core, but on the peripherals, you will see a lot of interference from here and there.
Thank you very much, Maria.
Yeah, I mean, just linking to this point, I think it will be backfiring to interpret this protest as a foreign manipulation. I mean, also an Iranian interest, I think, because I think that also Iran has to probably think of how to change also partners in some way. This will be strategic also for the Iranians, not to think how we can partner with different people, because maybe these people who are today in Baghdad, they won't be there forever. So I think it will be interesting, I think, to consider other partners as well. While, however, I have to say that what we are seeing is rather a situation where unfortunately, I'm not sure I agree with the fact that the political representation will come easily in the movement, because what we are seeing is that the violent repression of protest is actually paralyzing those elements of the protest who are more politically aware. So you have actually those elements that are more like, that they reject every single sort of deal with the political establishment, that are gaining voice, as opposed to, and that they're also less politically aware, that they go in all directions, they don't have really a specific demand, while those ones who are civic activists, people who are more used to also deal with state institutions, that are paralyzed, neutralized by the violence. So what I fear it might happen is that this different level of violence that, as I said, goes from direct violence to also level of threats, will actually prevent the emergence of a real participation into the election. And you are going to have a situation of latent violence, even if new elections are going to be in place with new mechanism. But indeed, we need to keep the focus on how to, this is why it's so important to protect those voices in the movement which are more politically aware, because this is a key to the solution of the problem. This is a key to enable the political representation if elections are going to be in place, in addition to having open lists and technical details as the election law proposes that actually favor their participation. Last but not least, I want to have, because I was part of a CSDP.
You have 11 seconds.
11 seconds? Okay. We should not be as EU, as Saudi Arabia, just having money.
Right.
We need to make those tools that we have actually effective. CSDP mission is a very good tool, but we need to make it effective. Again, new partners. We cannot only partners with the MOI. We need to partners also with people who actually, or at least if we partner with the MOI, let's identify the people who can bring change to the Ministry of Interior.
You asked for more seconds, but you're not going to have it. I tell you what. There is Federico over there, there is Chiara over there, and there is Paolo Magri and Ambassador Bruno Bascuno that I want to thank for really working hard to make this event happen. And they invited senior ministers, a number of them who should have been here. They cancelled immediately the day after the day of their resignation. Otherwise, they would have been here defending their corner too. And I want to thank every one of you. I mean, you're not going to kill me afterwards unless you're urging to say it. Yeah, go on, Don, go on. Let's give him that one.
45 seconds. Okay, 30 seconds.
Yeah, go on.
On the Iranian aspect, I must say that Iran must change its policy in terms of sometime they back certain criminals that they are perpetrating and they are committing crimes in Iraq and in the name and under the protection of the Iranians. And this is something I think it backfires on the Iranians big time. And when you see that the Iraqis sometimes you see chanting against Iran, very much is related to this aspect, where some of these people are really committing these crimes and they have the protection, or they are doing it under that protection, and that shouldn't be there. So Iran needs to review this aspect of its policy big time.
Maria, Farhad, Andrey, Michael, I want to thank you very much for sticking to time. We're going to break record. We're going to finish before time rather on time. I want to thank every one of you for being here and engaging and being so interactive. Thank you again.